Good Tuesday morning to you. As we continue our series, Can You Relate? Today we have Samson. Now, yesterday we talked about Samson's parents and the faithfulness that they had in listening to God's angel and bringing forth Samson as a child from a barren woman. Today we have the story of Samson, and Samson's story really goes in from chapter 14 through chapter 16 of the book of Judges. He is the judge that will reign next over Israel, and he's probably one of the more familiar judges that we have. There's VeggieTale stories that are about Samson. We teach the story of Samson often in our Sunday school classes. There's a lot of parodies to other modern stories that are derived from that of Samson, because we love that he's a Nazarite. He does not put a razor to his scalp. That means he doesn't cut his hair. He stays pure. He does not drink from that of the vine, which means he drinks no fermented wine or what we might call beer today, something similar to that. He has a pureness about him, and that pureness is actually still practiced today. If you know anything about the Nazarene church and the Nazarene people, they tend to have a more pure lifestyle. Of course, many of them still cut their hair. But refraining from alcohol is still part of the practice of the church, especially in its leadership. So we have Samson the Nazarite, and he grows in wisdom before the Lord. He judges Israel for about 20 years, and while he has this incredible strength, his parents have made this incredible promise. He has grown in the Lord. He has a wonderful faith. There is something about Samson that becomes his downfall. Samson, as we learn about his story in chapter 14 and 15, chapter 14 is about Samson encountering a Philistine woman and then asking his parents if he can have her in marriage. Manoah would like to have Samson marry someone from in the Israelites, and Samson even breaks the custom according to the Almighty and wants to go outside of his people and marry someone in the Philistines. Now, of course, the Philistines are the great enemy at this point in the narrative. They have oppressed and they have taken over a lot of the freedoms that God meant for the Israelites. And so Samson encounters this woman, and he wishes to marry her. And in the process of traveling back and forth, we have a story in chapter 14, verses 5 through 9, where he encounters a lion and he kills the lion. And then the next time he goes down to the Philistines, he finds that there's honey in the carcass of the lion. This is not for morning breakfast. This is a devotional that has a little bit of gratuitous violence. And then Samson tells the people a riddle, the Philistine people a riddle. Now the Philistines are angry because they can't figure out the riddle. And it has to do with this lion and this carcass and this honey. And so they get the woman that Samson wants to marry, they get her to trick Samson into telling her the meaning of the riddle. And of course then she tells all the townsmen and betrays Samson. And Samson goes and seeks revenge and acts revenge on the people. The reality is that Samson's great and wise and holy and pure, but he has one thing that seems to be a consistent issue for him in his life. He then meets Delilah. That's the partnership that we are most familiar with in chapter 16, Samson and Delilah. He is amazed with her. He is taken over of her. And the townspeople see an opportunity, the Philistines see an opportunity to really get a hold of Samson because of this amazing strength that he has. So they give her 1,100 pieces of silver if she is able to find out what his secret is. So she tries once, and Samson kind of mocks her, right? And then she tries again, and she becomes somewhat relentless in finding out, and she wears Samson down. She wears him down after she nagged him. And in chapter 16, verses 16 and 17, it says, finally, after she had nagged him with her word day after day, and she pestered him, he was tired to death. This is a great opportunity if you are a married couple and you are listening to this devotional. This is a great opportunity to poke each other, right? In our relationships, whether it's spouses or maybe it's parents and children, whether you're adult children or not, sometimes we nag each other to death. We wear each other down. We do this for good things, right? Go to the doctor, get some help, get some labs, get checked out, lose some weight. Sometimes those are good naggings. Too often they are not. They are for our own satisfaction, for our own desires. And we literally wear someone down to the point of they just give up. And really that's what Samson does in this moment. He just gives up. And so he finally says, a razor has not come to my head. And Delilah realizes that she has now the whole secret. So she shares that. And they seize him and they shave his head and they gouge out his eyes and they make a mockery out of him. Now again, a woman has betrayed Samson, but Samson is staying firm to the Lord Almighty. And so the Philistines, in their excitement and their glory, they wish to create Samson as a great offering to their god Dagon. And so they chain Samson to the temple pillars, and they're offering this great feast to their god Dagon, which is a pagan god. And Samson, in that moment, in verse 28, we read, Samson called the Lord and said, Lord God, remember me and strengthen me only this once, O God, so that with this one act of revenge I may pay back the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And then he asks them to rest against the pillar, and then Samson calls on again the Lord, and then enacts this great moment of revenge. He says, let me die with the Philistines. And so in this moment, when he pulls down the pillars, it's that great image that we love when we think about Samson. We read in the 16th chapter, very end of it, that he had killed more people in his death than he did in his life. And God brought judgment against the Philistines. Here's the reality. We can relate to Samson because we all have something that distracts us from what God would intend. We all have something in our lives that becomes our kryptonite. That's the comparison to Superman, right? It becomes that vice. Maybe we think that vice is insignificant, but when we don't acknowledge the power of vices in our lives, we forget that they do have power, and we maybe don't realize how much power we give them and what we give up for the sake of that vice. Samson's vice was women. He loved women, and he loved women who betrayed him. Hopefully, your vice is less destructive in your life, and I know as I think about the vices I have in my life, they're less destructive. And sometimes we only talk about the big things, the big problems that exist in our life, like addiction. And addiction is pretty widespread. But we also have to remember that the vices in our life that often are even more problematic than those big things like addiction to substances or alcohol or money or sex or food. Sometimes they come in the most subtle of forms by just taking our focus away from what God is doing or what God would have us focus on and turn to something that brings us our own satisfaction. That's when we have to be careful, and that's when we have to be mindful of the power of those things in our lives. I think this is something that we can all relate to in the story of Samson. We all have something that distracts us from God, whether it's our own desire for power or security or wanting us to navigate a way that is different than God might want us to navigate. Maybe it is those big things like substance abuse or sexual abuse, or all of the different wants and desires that we have that overtake us. I think about how food has become so problematic in our society. It's no longer just drugs and alcohol. It's also food, and our behaviors, our obsessive compulsive behaviors that affect us and our relationships. Can you relate to Samson? Well, we probably all can relate to Samson. But hopefully what we can also see is that God is in the middle of that. You know, I love how God redeemed Samson by allowing Samson to enact revenge. He redeemed Samson and the faithfulness that Samson had had his entire life, regardless of this one vice. That's true for us in our lives as well. We may have a one vice in our life that causes us trouble, but God's still at work and God's still in the midst of it. And God is wanting us to come to him with all of that we carry, the things that we're great at, but the things that we're failing at too, and bring it all to his feet. Have a great Tuesday.